Hello, my beloved listeners. I'm so glad you could join me today. And do I have a special treat for you? Instead of a single story, I have multiple tales for you to chew on. So, with that being said, here are 10 scary stories to give you the creeps. It's been 8 months since the incident, and I'm still hearing sirens in my sleep. It was a Thursday evening. I came home from work to an empty house. My wife Lena's clothes and phone weren't missing. Her cell phone sat abandoned on our counter, vibrating with calls and notifications. The only thing signifying that she hadn't been abducted was her missing car. I hadn't even completed all 3 numbers of 911 when police officers came to my door. Our neighbor, Janice, stood behind them, eyes rimmed with red tears. She had asked Lena to pick her son Thomas up from school due to a work emergency, meaning he was also missing. They questioned Janice and I repeatedly over the following weeks to no avail. We knew less than they did. No one wanted our loved ones home more than we did. Janice and I got the answers we asked for about 2 months later, but they weren't the ones we wanted. Lena's car was found burned, crushed like a tin can. Someone saw a set of tire tracks heading off the mountainside and called it in once they saw the wreckage at the bottom. This New Year's Eve, I finally got the courage to try and remove the last of Lena's clothes from the house. The closet had been cleared, leaving only the items she kept in the linen trunk. I painstakingly packed up her favorite skirts, dresses, and shoes. My heart felt emptier with every new item I removed from it. My heart broke to find a heart-shaped box at the bottom, one I'd never seen before. A tag was taped atop it, my name scrawled across it in red ink. There was no lock, no key to be found. Only a simple metal clasp kept me from the last gift my wife would ever give me. My fingers fumbled to open it in a frenzied anticipation. The endless possibilities of her love called to me from inside. Once it opened, I felt my soul freeze and then shatter. Tears ran down my face as I punched our closet walls until my knuckles bled. Laid inside was a simple scrap of bloodied paper. A set of latitude and longitude coordinates, which I found led to the same mountainside her car was found at the bottom of. It was written in my wife's handwriting, along with a message. Dear Tobin, I know about you and Janice. It always killed me that Thomas had your eyes. It's sad when the only former high school classmate you see is your drug dealer. Most of our nerd table at the lunchroom became lawyers, doctors, tech executives. Except for Drew. Dealing drugs is just one of his jobs. He bartends at weddings, buys junker cars, then takes them to Mexico to flip for a few grand. He lives in a Mercedes Sprinter outside of San Diego. Usually he leaves my normal order in the garden without even saying hi. Tonight he asked if I could meet him in person. I know he doesn't profit off my orders, so I drove down after closing up shop early. Drew's dad is a lawyer. His brother is a lawyer. I am a lawyer. I also take prescription for Provigil, and sometimes microdose psilocybin mushrooms, because I have my own family issues. How's the trial going? Drew asks. Klein has lied to us the entire time, but we picked a jury that would ride or die with him. I smirked. Well, at least he'll learn a valuable lesson from all this. Drew replied. He looked around the area, opened up his glove compartment, and handed me my bag. I'm probably not going to be taking any tonight, but I don't mind if you want to get high and hang, I said. Actually, I wanted to pick your brain on something, and it's better if you're not high when I mention any of this, he said. If it's legal advice, you better have given me good shit, I replied. No, I mean I don't think it is, he said. Do you remember Carrie K. Rothwell? Drew asked. I leaned back in my chair. I knew he didn't have the proper way to word that question. The apology filled his eyes before he could give it. Yeah, I mean, you know I was there. Right? I said. Truthfully, I don't remember that night at all, Drew said. You were there, though. It was after a soccer game. Carrie K. Rothwell was a cute girl, bubbly but a bit of a loner. There were so many Carrie, and Carries with Ks. In her class, she went by Carrie K. The sad thing is that she didn't travel with a pack of other girls with her. Always seemed to have a new friend each semester. She played on the girls' soccer team as a junior, went to the boys' games every fall. 2 of our friends were in the band. I was writing for the paper. We were all driving to get some fast food when Carrie K's car was spotted on the road. She had hit a deer, or to be specific, the deer hit her. Her Jeep Cherokee smashed so hard into it its head was decapitated, and it smashed right into Carrie K, killing her. I pulled over. It had probably been 4 or 5 minutes after the crash. Other cars pulled over. Cops came. Neighbors walked blocks to see it. Drew was in the car with me that night. He didn't even get out to help Carrie K. He just muttered that she was dead and we shouldn't even get out. I knew he had a crush on her, but in a way where they weren't in each other's circles, and it wouldn't have worked out. She and I never talked, but I knew of her, mostly because her mom was one of my favorite teachers at school. I went to look, just to make sure what I thought wasn't wrong. The deer head was in the back seat, its body underneath the back tires. Carrie K's hand still tied to the wheel. Are the memories bothering you? Want to talk about it? I asked Drew. So I found her YouTube page, he replied. What? Yeah, she had a screen name on AOL. Millhouse's Goldfish 84, he said. Where's the bull, Bart? I quoted. Canine's Mutiny, one of my top 10 episodes, he replied. Anyways, I sort of think about her every now and then. And it hit me that maybe she had used that username on a forum or had a blog with it, Drew said. And you found a YouTube page? He nodded. There were 8 videos. He clicked on a random one. Holy crap, that's her, I said. The videos felt more like home movies than YouTube content. Like finding someone's roll of vacation film and not seeing anything interesting at all, but soaking in the melancholy of it all. This one is better, Drew said. He clicked on one of her in the woods. She seemed to be walking around and filming birds. What would people think if they knew that my mom taught religious studies at a Catholic school, but was really into Aleister Crowley? The next part of the video had her inside of a crypt, whistling as if looking for a dog. What would people think if they knew that my first communion was from the beast and not a priest? Is this one of those Blair Witch knockoffs everyone is trying to make? I laughed. Hold on, Drew said, fast-forwarding 20 minutes into the 40-minute video. She was back in the woods. Hey there, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm not here to hurt you, Carrie K said. Walking through the woods was a young deer. Carrie K sang a song. To be specific, it sounded more like someone was trying to sing while hiccuping. I'm not here to hurt you, No. You're going to hurt me, okay? The deer came closer and closer. Then it nervously bowed to her. No, not today. When we're both older, let's try to enjoy the time we have in these bodies. She positioned the camera on the ground and hugged the deer. You're scared of dying, aren't you? She whispered to the deer. I am too. Can we cry together? She began crying. The deer began to shudder as she put her arm around it. See? We have to die so we can instruct the others how to get into the nightmare room. What the fuck is this, Drew? I asked. One more. I should get going. But he clicked on it and held my arm down. It was Carrie Kay, riding the deer, like it was a horse at night. Do you know where that street is? He asked. It's where she died. I wanted to make sure, he said. Drew, you do realize that. Go ahead and say it. He interrupted me. She died in 2000. 7 or 8 years before YouTube was even a website, I said. I know. These videos didn't even get uploaded until 2014. Who uploaded this? I asked. Maybe her mom? She died our freshman year of college. I went to her funeral, I said. How did I not know that? Because it was a suicide. Whoever uploaded this knew her by her screen name, and somehow they got these videos and uploaded it as her after her death. But why? Clowns weren't such a scary thing when I was a kid. Nowadays there are movies like It and B-horror flicks that make them out to be something they're not. Really, there's nothing more wholesome than a clown. Their entire purpose in life is to make people laugh. The good ones, anyway. I remember as a child seeing wholesome, happy clowns performing at birthday parties, for special occasions at school, at the circus, and the fair. Even on TV, there was Bozo the Clown entertaining you after school each day. There were other ones I hadn't heard of as a kid, who weren't so nice. Clowns like John Wayne Gacy, the infamous serial killer clown. And then there was my former friend, Mr. Giggles. See, when I was a kid, I told my parents I had an imaginary friend. But he wasn't imaginary. Even then, I was smart enough to know that he wasn't human either. Still, he existed in a tangible way, but only in the darkness. He could manipulate the world around him, the bathroom to be more specific. He never seemed to come out of the bathroom. He would crouch in the bathtub and tell me to close the curtain and stuff towels up the cracks in the top so no light could get in. He hated the light, he said. My parents would ask what I was doing in the bathroom for so long, and I would just say I was going number 2, and it was taking longer than expected. But really, I was talking to Mr. Giggles. I didn't have any friends, so he kept me company when I was feeling lonely. Except he wasn't good company. He only said things that made me feel worse about myself and my situation. Still, he was someone to talk to, and he was my only friend. The kids at school think you're fat and you stink, he would say as I got older. Haven't you heard of deodorant? They're all talking about your body odor, especially the girls, especially Danielle. I liked Danielle. Mr. Giggles would always laugh when he insulted me, to tell me that it was just a joke, and not to worry about it. Only his laugh didn't sound like he was kidding. "Yeah, I guess I should ask my mom to buy me some," I said, embarrassed. "Ha! Good luck. She doesn't have any money for you, only for your sisters. They're the only ones she really cares about. You know that." "They're all talking about you behind your back too, you know." And on it would go in the bathroom until someone would knock at the door and kick me out. When my younger brother died, it got even worse. He was just getting old enough for us to become friends. When he died of a rare illness after several months in the hospital, Mr. Giggles told me it was my fault, and I believed him. Pretty soon after that, when I was just becoming a teenager, Mr. Giggles started getting meaner. He'd talk in venomous tones about the other kids at school. He'd talk about them for a while, and I'd start to chime in, suddenly feeling better about myself while trash-talking the popular kids at school who ignored me. Only then, the sinister clown would quickly flip the conversation into talk about how worthless I was, how insignificant. I'd tell him he was right, that I was a loser. Still no friends at school, walking around on my lunch break with my head down, trying not to be noticed for an hour. Eating granola bars and pretending I was going somewhere, moving quickly, too quickly for anyone to notice how alone I was, I hoped. In my 3rd year of high school, I actually made a friend. Then a group of us started walking to the pizza place together every day. Terrible for my cholesterol. But still, I was making some friends finally. We began hanging out together after school, and I started to forget all about Mr. Giggles. It was just like he had been a figment of my imagination. I finished high school and went to college. When I got there, I was all alone again. I had rented a bedroom in a house near campus, but I was in a city 100 miles away from all my friends and family. My college roommates and classmates were indifferent to me. We didn't talk or socialize, just passed by each other in the halls. It wasn't that I didn't try to talk to people, but it just never went well when I did. They became awkward again, after months of loneliness. By the 2nd year there, it seemed like I was once again destined to have no friends for the foreseeable future. I gave up and spent most of my time in my room while my housemates had parties and played loud music that I didn't particularly like. I would go down and try to socialize occasionally, but could never get anywhere. I don't mean to sound stuck up, but we just had nothing in common. I tried to talk to them, but they had their own stories and history, and I always felt like a third wheel, until I ended up going back upstairs to my room. One night, I was doing just that when I heard laughter from the bathroom upstairs. There were half a dozen people in the living room, but no one was in the 2nd floor bathroom. I went over to the bathroom door, more curious than afraid, and heard it again. The grunting laugh of a sarcastic clown behind the shower curtain. I had never seen his face and never wanted to. He was terrible. I had forgotten about him and how much I hated him. He wasn't my friend. He only wanted me to feel bad with him. To be in the darkness, in the cold with him. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I thought you left for good." A ripped and tattered white glove hand reached out from behind the curtain and pulled it back. His face was covered in dry and cracking white paint, red around the eyes and lips. His mouth was gaping open unnaturally in a large grin, displaying rotten teeth, pointy and plentiful. He was wearing a black and white clown outfit and was torn and decayed. He stayed back in the shadows, and I could barely make out the details of him from where I stood, just a few feet away. The worst part was his eyes. They glowed like mirrors and reflected brightly back at me, mesmerizing me. When I had been a kid, I was never afraid of Mr. Giggles. But now, as an adult, I realized this was no figment of my overactive imagination. This creature, whatever he was real. I felt more afraid than ever before in my life as I realized he could reach out and grab me, choke me if he wanted to. But that wasn't what he wanted. I never left you. I'm a part of you. Say it. Say I'm a part of you. He spoke softly, hypnotically, convincing. He began to stand up from his crouching position in the bathtub. Suddenly, I noticed he was very tall. His head nearly touched the ceiling in the shower as he loomed over me. His curly crimson tufts of hair stuck up and brushed against the damp, mildewed tiles. I tried to brush away what he said. I couldn't. I started to repeat back what he had told me as I looked up at him standing above me. As scared as I was, his words made sense to me in that moment. I started to repeat his words back to him. You're a part— Jason! Are you up there? One of my roommates was shouting from the bottom of the staircase. I stuttered for a second, scared and looking at the clown in my shadowy bathtub, staring down at me from the darkness and waiting for me to submit to him. Yeah, I'm here, I said back, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head at me and held up his finger to his mouth in a silencing gesture, smiling all the while. Yeah, I'm here, I said again, louder this time. Come downstairs, man. We're gonna play Twister and— Hey! He lowered his voice. I think Sarah's friend might like you. You know Corinne. She keeps asking where you went. Come on! In the shadows behind the shower curtain, Mr. Giggles stood waiting. I backed away, scared to turn away from him. When I got to the door, I turned to leave when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in several years. The voice of my deceased younger brother, Carl. I wished I hadn't heard it, but I did. It's your fault I died, you know, he said. You got me sick that time at the park when you didn't tell me to drink the water from the puddle. You double dared me, and I did it, and look what happened. Now I live here with him, in the darkness, in the blackness, in the world without light. Join us, brother. His voice sounded different the longer I listened to it, like a slightly sped-up cassette tape. My legs trembled as I walked down the stairs, and I heard his whimpers and sobs turn to high-pitched laughter. Motherfucking Mr. Giggles. Prior to this beach trip, I did not believe in paranormal anything. I could watch horror movies and sleep soundly as soon as I finished. I wasn't always that way, afraid of monsters in my closet when I was younger. But as I got older, I realized that real life was usually a lot scarier. This all changed when my family went to the beach. We were going to a little town in South Carolina, somewhere we've been half a dozen times. It's an older community with hanging moss everywhere that creates an artificial twilight even in the middle of the day. The nights are never quiet due to the loud cicadas and crickets that incessantly chip outside the windows. When I was young, this gave me great comfort because I loved that I could fall asleep not feeling alone. What was different this trip was that first, I was much older, and second, for the first time, we were staying in a house instead of a small condo. It wasn't an old house and didn't have a haunted feel to it, by any means. Just your average beach house that was maybe a little worse for wear. The first few days passed mostly uneventfully. We would swim and ride bikes during the day and go to dinner together, but At 8 or 9, I would go to my room, which was upstairs, while my mom and stepdad would go to theirs. We all wouldn't sleep for a few hours. I could hear their TV murmuring below my floorboards. But I think we all knew we needed some time alone. The strange part was that when I was in my room, I didn't feel alone. I chalked it up to the singing bugs outside my window and the fact that the room was much larger than the one at my home. But as I would lay in bed, the glow of my laptop screen only on, I could almost see someone or something standing just outside my peripheral vision. At the time, I didn't think much of it other than making the unconscious decision to never sleep facing the window. I can't explain it, but something felt raw and wrong about doing it. So even though I usually did sleep facing away from the doors, I forced myself to stay on my left side. As the trip progressed, I started having strange and vivid dreams. I don't usually remember my dreams with so much detail, but every single night of the trip, I did. And they weren't just weird dreams. It was like they were a dumping ground for my deepest and most private thoughts. Things I didn't even know were bothering me started surfacing. And each night at around 2 or 3 a.m., I would wake up incredibly nauseated and about to throw up. It would dissipate after a few minutes, but in the moment it was overwhelming. Due to this, I was increasingly tired as the trip went on. The last night I was beat. I said goodnight to my parents early and went up to bed while they were still in the kitchen. I fell asleep pretty quickly. Then at around 2 a.m., it happened. My stepdad was leaving early the next morning since he had to go on a work trip. We had driven there together, but it would just be my mom and I driving back. So when I woke up, I assumed I'd heard his Uber coming up to the driveway or seen the headlights through my window. Wrong. It was dead dark outside, and I realized, dead silent. Those bugs were not chirping, so the only sound was the low hum of the AC. This unnerved me, but not as much as the feeling that washed over me moments later. There was someone in the room. I could feel them, standing just over my bed. The moon was casting an eerie glow across the wall, and I could see its shadow. It was a silhouette of a man, tall and slender. I was still facing away from where it was, and I was not about to turn over. I kept my breathing even and shut my eyes. The feeling continued until, finally, I fell asleep again. I awoke exhausted the next morning. I assumed I'd dreamed the strange visitor and went about my morning as normal. We left the house pretty quickly. On the way back, my mom and I were both sleepy. I mentioned the man, half laughing about how I'd thought I'd seen a ghost. She nearly stopped the car. "I saw someone too," she said quietly. At the time, she believed in the paranormal much more than I did. I swallowed hard as she described exactly what I had. Waking up with a weird feeling, the silence of the bugs. The only difference was that she had been facing the window. She described our visitor as a tanned man, probably of Latin American descent, though she couldn't quite tell in the dim moonlight. He had been peering in her window, only his head and shoulders visible above the ledge. The strange part of this is that though her room was on the first floor, the house was built on stilts to avoid hurricane damage. The man would have had to be very, very tall to peer in her window. Like over 10 feet tall. We were both unnerved by this, but we were glad that we were on our way home. Neither of us have seen the man again. It's been a couple of years since it happened, and we haven't spoken of him in a long time. But I still don't sleep facing my windows. Something is wrong with Carol. I'll probably end up going completely off my head if I don't share this with another person somehow. I don't know what to do with myself or my situation. I'm not at all ashamed to say that I'm actually terrified. I'm beyond terrified. It all started yesterday. Everything was just fine until I came home last night and found my wife, Carol, standing in the living room facing the television, which was off. She had her back to me, but I could see she was holding the remote in her left hand. She was just standing there, not moving, presumably staring at the blank screen. "Hey, honey," I said to her, closing the door after coming in. She didn't reply or even move an inch to acknowledge my presence. Carol?" I asked, a little concerned now. I put my bag down and walked over and around her to face her, and once I leapt back in fright, crashing into a table behind me and knocking the telephone and a lamp to the floor. Carol's face was warped into the strangest expression I'd ever seen. Her mouth was open, wide, unnaturally wide, to the point where her jaw should have been unhinged. A steady stream of drool leaked out of it slowly. Her eyes were bulging right out of her sockets and staring ahead in a horrific, empty stare. The sight filled me with unspeakable horror. It was my wife, but right now, she had me terrified to my very soul. I eventually gathered my wits and shouted her name loudly. This actually worked, and she seemed to actually be a bit frightened herself in the sudden noise. Her face returned to normal in the blink of an eye. "Harry?" she said, looking at me with a bit of a dim look on her face. "Yes, honey, it's me. Are you okay?" I asked her. She seemed to take some time to process this question. "I'm fine. I'm just tired. I think I'll go to bed," she replied. Without another word, she turned away and went to the stairs and up to the bedroom. She still had the remote in her hand. I was deeply disturbed by her whole manner. She spoke in a flat and empty tone, almost robotic, and moved in the same fashion. I sat on the sofa for a while to calm down and clear my head. She must not have been feeling well, that's all. I would check on her again when I went upstairs, but I needed to eat and shower first. Another oddity I noticed was that the kitchen was untouched. Carol always made dinner and left it in the warmer for when I came home. But there was nothing. I'm not the sort of man to take a big deal about something like that. I was more concerned at how unlike her it was. I made a few quick sandwiches and had those, went to shower and got into bed. Carol was there, fast asleep. I decided to not wake her and got into bed, kissed the back of her head gently and drifted off myself. Sometime during the night, I became aware of being awake and had a strange, wet sensation on my face. It took me a few seconds to realize, with utter horror, that there was a face just a few inches above mine in the dark. It was Carol, leaning over me on all fours, her face inches from mine. Even in the darkness, I could see that horrifying stretched mouth and bulging white eyes. This time I could hear a faint gurgling sound somewhere deep in her throat. I screamed and pushed her off of me, grabbing the blanket and wiping her drool off of my face. I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on and looked at Carol, my heart hammering and struggling to catch my breath after my fright. She sat there, staring at me. "Harry?" she said faintly. I trembled and struggled to gather myself and answer her. Yes, honey. Is something wrong? Do you feel okay? I managed. She looked at me for a long time. It seemed like an hour, but was probably barely a minute. I'm fine. I'm just tired. I think I'll go to bed. She replied, and with that she turned over on her side and went back to sleep. I left the room immediately and went down to the living room, still trembling. I sat on the sofa and took a few breaths, trying to think. She had said the exact same words in the exact same dead and empty manner. And that face. Dear Lord. I couldn't think of what to do. It was just past midnight, but I decided to call my dad. He picked up after a few rings and answered in a sleepy voice. Hello? Hey Dad, it's me. I'm sorry for calling so late, I said. It's alright, son. Something wrong? No, well, yes. It's Carol, Dad. I think she's sick or something. She's been acting really strange and it's scaring me. A lot. It's scaring me a lot. There was a long silence on his end. I almost asked if he was there when he spoke. Son, we've been through this already. I know it's hard. I know what it did to you when you lost Carol. Accidents happen, and while the results can be truly horrible, you need to take the time to heal and move on. Do you remember Dr. Webster saying that it might play with your mind, and you need to be strong and focus on moving on? I remember that. You need to talk to us, son. You haven't called me for quite a while until now. I won't know if you're okay if you don't talk to me or Dr. Webster. We're here for you, son. We want to help. He finished. His words fell into me like a pile of bricks from 2 stories up. My heart actually seized for a few moments as I processed what he was saying. Everything was coming back and flickering through my mind like a horrible slideshow. The phone call, rushing home from work terrified, finding the flashing lights at the scene just a block away from home. I remember screaming voicelessly when I saw her lying there, broken in the middle of the road, how I threw myself on her and sobbed. I didn't even get to say goodbye and she was already gone. I hung up the phone call and stared at the wall in front of me for a while. I don't even know what I felt. Ashamed at blocking it all out. Angry at myself for freaking myself out like this. It had seemed so real. If it was a trick of the mind, it was a damned powerful one. I went back to the room and found what I now expected to find. Nothing. I sighed and sat on the edge of the bed with my head in my hands. What was wrong with me? I decided to just go back to bed. I eventually drifted off again. At 3:03 a.m., I was scared out of my wits again and had shut myself away in the bathroom, trying not to die of hyperventilation. I had managed to make a call to 911 and hoarsely tell them I needed help. I'd had another eerie moment of slowly becoming awake and realizing that I could sense I wasn't alone in the room. I'm not crazy, goddammit! After the police came and went, they found nothing. I was too terrified to stay at home and decided to go to a motel for the night. This time I'm not losing my mind. Someone was in bed next to me. I could hear them breathing, and that gurgling sound. That goddamn gurgling sound. My freshman year of high school began just days after my parents and I moved to a new town. Naperville, Illinois. They told me about the move just weeks before it happened. I was opposed to the idea, to say the least. I had spent my entire life in Kentucky. It was where all my friends were. The only reason my parents even wanted to move was because they were paranoid after a man a few blocks away from us was found murdered. This was undeniably disconcerting, but the idea of moving away because of it was completely absurd, which is exactly what I told my parents. But it didn't matter what I said. They insisted that we leave as soon as possible. They chose Naperville because it was the town in which they'd spent their childhoods. I was enrolled in Southview High School, the same high school they had attended. It was my first day there. I was eating lunch in the cafeteria, and as one could expect, I was alone. I didn't know a single person in that entire school. At the moment, this didn't matter to me. I was in no mood to socialize. I thought about my friends back in Kentucky. It was still summer for them, as my new school started a week earlier for whatever reason. They were all probably playing Xbox together, and I was missing it. I looked up to see an older boy walking in my direction. He was probably a senior, or at least a junior. I expected him to just walk right past me, so I was surprised when he took the seat across from me. "Hi," he said. "My name's Rupert." Flummoxed by his decision to converse with me, I simply replied, "My name's Jeffrey." It was then that I noticed he didn't have a lunch tray. "Where's your lunch?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't need one." "Do you not have any money?" He shook his head. "No, I'm good. Don't worry about it." "Okay." I stared at him with fascination. His look was right out of the 1980s. He wore a thick leather jacket over a white t-shirt and had long, blonde hair that he wore in a mullet. I presumed this was because he wanted to be unique, which I thought was laudable. "You new here?" he asked. "Yeah, my family just moved here from Kentucky." "How do you like it so far?" he asked. I thought about my answer for a moment, and decided not to tell him how I really felt. "It's nice." He chuckled. "But you'd rather be in Kentucky, right?" I nodded sheepishly, wondering what gave it away. Moves can be that way sometimes. You'll get used to it. "You got any siblings?" "No," I answered. "You know anyone here?" "No," I repeated. "Why'd you guys move?" Well... I rolled my eyes just thinking about how ludicrous this answer would sound. "A guy in our neighborhood got murdered. My parents got scared and wanted to get out of there." "So I take it they never caught the murderer," said Rupert. "Yeah, I don't think they have." "Parents are weird," Rupert said after a brief pause. This I could agree with. "Have you ever looked into your parents?" he asked me, curiously. I was perplexed. "What, you mean like Googled them?" Yeah, something like that." No," I answered. "Why?" He shrugged again. "You'd be surprised what you might find. You should do it sometime." Okay," I said, still a bit mystified. Lunch ended shortly after. 4 hours later, I was sitting up in my room working on my math homework. My teacher assigned a double-sided worksheet on the first day, something that had never happened to my old school, or any other school I'd been to. The moment I finished the worksheet, I stood up and walked to my door. I could finally go and play Xbox. I hoped that some of my friends were online. But just before I left the room, I remembered Rupert telling me to look up my parents. I couldn't deny that I was a little curious. I decided to do a quick search and walked over to my computer. Looking back, it would have made more sense to search for them individually, but I Googled them simultaneously, typing in my mother's name followed by my father's. The first link I found was to an article about a 17-year-old boy who had been murdered. Both surprised and intrigued, I clicked on it. It was an old article from 1987. The first paragraph explained that the boy had been found stabbed to death in a forest near Naperville, Illinois. This made me think for a moment. My parents had both turned 50 earlier this year, so it quickly occurred to me that both of them would have been 17 in 1987, going to high school in Naperville. It was the next paragraph that made my blood run cold. After reading it, I learned that my mother and father, the people I had lived with and known my entire life, had been interrogated on speculation of first-degree murder. They were the last people to have been seen with the boy, but they were never prosecuted due to a lack of evidence. I sat there in shock for a good 5 minutes, questioning everything I knew about my parents. I told myself several times that they were not murderers, and the fact that they had been with the victim the same day he was killed was purely coincidental. I became more confident that this was the truth, and finally looked back at the article to see if there was any more information. Which there was. At the bottom of the page was a picture of the murdered boy. It was Rupert. "Why did I do this?" Patrick muttered to himself as he took out his phone and checked the time. It was 8:04 p.m. "What are you crying about?" I said with a condescending grin as I closed the warehouse door and scanned my employee card. "You're late," complained Patrick. "Not everyone can live 4 miles from work, asshole," I said sarcastically. We both had volunteered to stay overnight at the warehouse and count inventory. I never minded helping out when it was needed, but Patrick was never one to go out of his way. "Even then, I'm surprised you volunteered," I sneered. "I could use the overtime," Patrick said reluctantly. We both had half of the warehouse to count. Each of us had to start at opposite ends of the building and work our way to the middle. When we were finished, we had to switch count sheets and count each other's until a number was agreed on it. It wasn't very strenuous work, but it was tedious. The warehouse was vast, so we thought it'd be best to use walkie-talkies to communicate any issues. We grabbed our count sheets and went to our corresponding ends of the building. What was once a noise-laden work floor was now an eerily silent stretch of metal and concrete. The occasional gust of cold winter wind would rattle the rolling dock doors, sending the sound of shaking metal echoing through the warehouse. "Radio check," I said into my walkie.
"Fuck you."
"Hey, I know you like listening to music, but make sure to keep one ear open for the walkie-talkie."
Yeah, whatever."
Patrick replied condescendingly, and all went silent. We had been working for about an hour when my radio started acting strange. It would beep every few minutes as if someone had been talking, but no sound came through. Just a beep. After about 10 minutes of this, I figured it had to be Patrick messing around. I grabbed my radio from my belt and pressed the talk button. "Patrick, come in." No answer. "Patrick, I know you keep pressing the damn button. Where are you?" I was growing impatient. No answer. "Alright, asshole, just wait till I find you." I walked across the barren warehouse, checking every aisle. Finally, I peered around one aisle and spotted him. "Patrick!" I yelled, walking toward him. Patrick showed no signs of hearing me. "Hey, asshole!" Annoyed, I walked up to Patrick and gave him a shove on his shoulder. "Hey, what the hell, man?" Patrick exclaimed while removing his earbuds. "Could you quit fucking with the radio?" I said in disdain. "I'm not. I haven't touched my radio." "Then why does mine keep going off?" I said, not believing a word. "How should I know? It's probably fucked up. Go switch it out," Patrick said, putting his earbuds back in. I pulled the earbud out of Patrick's left ear. "I thought I told you to leave one out so you could hear the walkie." "Fine, whatever," Patrick said. I walked away and back towards the office. Patrick had started at the far end of the building, so I had to walk farther than before. When I got to the office, I placed my radio on the charger and grabbed another one. I turned on the radio with the knob at the top and pressed the button. "Radio check."
You're good.
Patrick said in reply. I made my way back to where I was working and continued where I left off. I had been working for another half hour or so when it happened again. It was my radio again. This time my patience was very thin. I grabbed it without hesitation, pressed the talk button, and yelled, "I knew you were fucking with me!"
What?
Patrick said in reply. "You keep pressing the damn talk button. The shit isn't funny, Patrick." I never heard a reply. The next sound of the walkie was almost like a faint music. It sounded like a music box, but it was so faint that I had to put the walkie up to my ear to hear it. The chimey notes seemed to get louder. Then they were suddenly interrupted by a loud and sudden static. I yanked it from my ear and winced in pain. The static stopped suddenly, and at the same time, every light in the warehouse went out. I reached for my pocket. Damn, I thought. I had left my phone charging in the office at the other end of the warehouse. I shakingly put the radio to my face and pressed the talk button. "Patrick, you there?" No response. "Patrick, where are you?" Again, no response. I lowered the radio. Shit. I started walking slowly with my arms stretched forward in what I had assumed was the direction of the office. The warehouse was pitch black. You could get around just as easily with your eyes closed. I was pretty sure of where to walk, but I needed to be careful. Once I felt one of the aisle racks, I used each one as a guide. After walking for what seemed like an hour, I started hearing a strange sound. It was like a hum. I started walking towards the sound, until I realized it was coming from down the aisle I was approaching. I turned down the aisle and still couldn't see a damn thing. But the noise was louder than it had ever been since I had heard it. I finally recognized where the sound was coming from. It was the rumbling of a forklift engine. It couldn't have been more than 30 feet from me at that point. I could feel the heat coming from the exhaust, so it had to be facing away from me. I pulled out my radio. "Patrick?" I waited. No answer. "Damn it, Patrick, say something!" I waited. A sound came out of my radio, but it definitely wasn't the sound I was waiting for. It was that damn music again. It sounded much clearer this time. It was the chiming of a music box. The radio then made a loud static noise and fell silent. What the fuck? I continued walking towards the rumbling forklift with my arms outstretched. I didn't walk far before I felt my hands touch solid metal. What is this doing here? And that was the first time that thought had crossed my mind. I felt my way around to the side of the forklift and remembered that it had headlights. Excited to finally not be trapped in complete darkness, I reached over and turned the headlights on. Instead of comfort meeting me with open arms, I was met by sheer terror that hit me with a closed fist. Sitting directly in front of the forklift was a pool of blood. I looked in horror as I backed away. Then suddenly I paused. In the top of my peripheral vision, something caught my eye. I was terrified to look, but nevertheless I glanced up. What was once a blur in my peripheral vision was now clear in my direct line of sight. It was Patrick. He was hanging by a fork belonging to the forklift I was standing next to. The fork had impaled Patrick through his mouth and came out of the back of his head. He was suspended some 20 feet in the air by it. I was petrified. Unable to move, I watched in horror as Patrick's head was no longer able to support the weight of his body. The echoing sound of cracking bone and ripping flesh filled my ears as Patrick's head was ripped in half at the jawbone, and his lifeless body was sent crashing down to the concrete below. I flinched as I was hit with a gruesome spray of blood and flesh. I wiped my hand over my face, which was caked in horror and disbelief. I felt a sudden shock rush through me as I heard the slow chimes of music echoing behind me. I started running. As the forklift sputtered out and the light faded behind me, I bursted out of the nearest emergency exit. The music sounded louder than ever. It was echoing through the entire warehouse as if it were playing on the loudspeakers. I was almost to my car when the music stopped. I turned around, and the lights of the warehouse flickered back on, and the door leading inside opened slowly. I closed my eyes tight and opened them in disbelief. Standing there in the doorway was a tall, pitch-black, skinny figure with long, pointed fingers. Mounted to his chest was what looked like an old music box. It seemed to be a part of him. After standing there motionless for a few minutes, I heard a clicking sound. He was winding up the music box. Without hesitation, I fondled through my pocket for my keys and hopped in my car. I had backed into the parking space, so I turned on my high beams. It was gone. The door to the warehouse was closed. There was no sign of anything different than when I had arrived that evening. I drove home, shaking like a leaf in the entire ride. When I got up to my room, I realized my cell phone was still back at the warehouse. I have no house phone, so I decided to hop on the computer and let everyone I could know of what happened. So, here I am. I don't know if I am going crazy or if any of what I saw was real. But there's no way I'm going back to find out. I'm afraid to fall asleep now, but this music is so soothing. They are smooth and feminine and fly through the air like delicate pale samaras. I am alone when I hear them, coming from the study. Two beautiful dancing arms. They rise above me and carry me across the floor like a stringless marionette in their siren song. They pull me over the dining room table, into the foyer, and romance me across every floor. Cool blue veins run from their bodiless shoulders down to their icy grip around my neck. They careen me every which way until all that I know is them. Beautiful and haunting. The music whistles and echoes through my home, my heart drumming with the glorious beat of an angelic crescendo. Their song runs up from my toes and into the hairs around my ears, then back down like water. They caress me and hold me in ways that no other lover ever could. Their fingertips play an invisible piano down my spine. The song comes through me in waves of sublime fire, and just as I feel I might explode in a fervor, they crane me over softly and hold me gentler. There is no heaven. no hell. No end or beginning of life. No summer rosebuds or autumn leaves. Only those delicate, pale arms that sing to me in the night and drive me into the purest fits of pleasure. I feel their song in my bones as they lead me to the second-story window and cradle me over to the balcony. My knees are weak. They are as cold as the winter wind. I dance with them in a trance, sure that there has never been anything before them, and surely there couldn't be anything after. Those two divine creatures are my world, and the music that comes with them, the language on my soul. I know them as I always have. They do not creep or bump in the night. They simply dance in their melancholy way. They fill me with the joy one is sad to know, and in knowing it, I am all the more woeful when it ends. We move together as one around the balcony and get caught in the breeze, allowing it to carry us like blades of grass along the hard ground. But with them, there is no ground. And so is with me. Abruptly, they leave me, just as they're about to dance me over the edge to my death. The mood changes sharply, and I know that's what they want. The arms want me to fall. I miss them every passing day that I don't hear their song in these halls. I hope they will be back, and that terrifies me. Now that I know them, I know I'll ache for an eternity without them. Like a soldier away from home, I call to them when I'm lonely, but they follow the heed of no man's words. They'll take me when they want, and I'll be happy for it. I'll be helpless. I've tried for a long time to remember their haunting song, but I hear it again, now, and I know I'll have my chance to dance with them over the edge of the balcony. I read this story on some horror forum online. God, it must have been 10 years ago now, maybe more. It always stuck with me. I don't know why. It wasn't particularly well written, and the concept has been done to death. But even now, all these years later, I'll catch myself thinking about it. Or I'll see a picture on the wall and I'll remember. The story went something like this. A guy moves into a house. It's old, has a lot of history. He gets it cheap. So he gets settled in. Everything is perfect. And then a few weeks later he discovers there's a woman in one of the paintings on the walls. A woman who wasn't there before. It's a landscape painting. She's wearing some sort of old-fashioned clothing. Maybe Victorian. Probably Victorian. That's how all of these stories go. She's got long black hair and pale skin and deep, staring eyes. Looking at her sort of creeps him out. He thinks he just hadn't noticed her before, tries to write it off as the fallibility of the human brain. But then she shows up in another painting. Then in the family photos, he starts seeing her in the background. It gets worse when she starts showing up in mirrors. And now the guy is hearing creaks and bumps in the night. Feels like he's being watched. Sees things out of place that he can't account for. Finally, he wakes up one day, walks downstairs and finds images of the woman sketched over every square inch of the walls. And every drawing seems to stare directly at him. It was one of those stories that had a picture with it. It was supposedly one of the walls with the woman sketched over and over on it. The sketching wasn't very good, but there was something unsettling about the picture all the same. Like I said, not the best one out there. We never find out who the woman is or why she's tormenting the poor narrator. We don't know why she suddenly appears on the walls. There's no resolution, and the climax leaves something to be desired. And yet, I've tried to find the story again, but I never could. Maybe the author deleted it. I wish they hadn't. I'd like to see that picture again. A few weeks ago, my mom asked for my help going through some great-grandma's things. We come from a family of pack rats with a strong interest in genealogy, meaning that throughout generations we've kept and recorded just about everything, squirreling it away to sit untouched in our attics. My mom inherited a lot of these artifacts of our family history from her mother, and since I'm the only one of us children who's shown an interest in our ancestry, I'll inherit them after she dies. So it was in my interest to help her sort through great-grandma's things, and maybe convince her to get rid of some of the more damaged items if I could. We ended up bringing her photo albums downstairs and spent part of the afternoon just paging through them, Mom pointing out the people she knew, which was most of them. And then we came to this one picture. It wasn't in a sleeve. It had been just tucked away in 2 random pages. It was an old black and white Polaroid of a woman in a long dress. She was staring impassively at the camera, her mouth twisted into a slight frown. She had this beautiful long hair and piercing eyes. Her hands were folded in front of her, and something about her just felt familiar. I asked my mom who she was, but she couldn't place her. There wasn't anything written on the back of the photo to give us a clue. The last time my mom had looked at the album had been years, over a decade, maybe more. She didn't recall ever having seen the picture. Couldn't imagine she had left it there, out of place as it was. I asked her if I could take it with me, on a whim, and she agreed. I couldn't get that strange sense of familiarity out of my head. It wasn't until I had gotten all the way home and through my front door that it hit me. She looked like the woman in the story. Obviously, there hadn't been any good pictures of the woman in the story, just drawings. What I mean is that she looked exactly like I'd imagine her, down to the curved wave in her hair and the placement of her hands. That's when I remembered another detail of the story that I'd long forgotten. The woman had her hands clasped in front of her in every picture, but in the drawings on the walls, she was reaching out as if to grab the narrator. I called my mom and told her about the story and the picture. I could tell she thought I was reading too much into things. She's a pretty practical and skeptical person. She did agree to go through great-grandma's writings and papers to see if she could figure out who the woman was. The next time I spoke to her was at my brother Nathan's memorial. It was just a few days after we found the picture. 10 years ago, Nathan was found in his home, his throat cut. He was only 34. Although the police investigation into his death picked up momentum almost immediately, nobody was ever charged for the crime. Our family has thoughts on who might have done it, but we've never been able to prove anything. We probably never will. Each year on the anniversary of his death, we have a little family gathering to remember and mourn. So we were at Mom's house, looking through old pictures of my brother and remembering. Mom had already told me that she hadn't found any information on the picture we'd found days before. It was about what I had expected. I decided to just stow the picture away and forget about it when I came across this certain picture of my brother. It was from his housewarming party, taken just a few months before his death. He was standing with his arm around me, and we were both making these stupid faces at the camera. I've looked at that photo thousands of times by now, but this was the first time I really noticed the painting in the background. It was a landscape painting, showing rolling hills dotted with trees. And there, standing next to one of the trees, was a figure. I had to squint to make it out, but it looked like a person. A woman. I was distracted for the rest of the memorial. I took the picture with me when I went home, and I just sat there and stared at it, wishing I could see the painting a little better. With that story on my mind and the picture Mom and I had found, it was hard not to connect the dots. Even though I was half convinced the dots I was connecting didn't actually exist. Clearly, I was reading too much into it. Nathan's death was hard on me, and I'm always a little off around the anniversary. I was seeing things that weren't there as a way of coping with the fact that my big brother's murderer will probably never face justice for what he did. I put both of the pictures in my bedside drawer and decided to leave it well enough alone. Maybe another day when I was feeling more like myself, I'd look at them again. Maybe. Weeks passed by, and gradually my uneasiness faded. It became easier to see it all as a product of my imagination. I've always been the imaginative sort, anyway. And then, yesterday, I got up to get dressed for work and I walked into the bathroom. As I passed by the mirror, I saw someone else standing in there with me. A woman with dark, wavy hair and piercing eyes, her hands folded primly in front of her. I whirled around, only to find myself alone. When I turned back to the mirror, her image was gone. It was her. I'm sure it was her. I haven't stopped thinking about her since then, or that story. Was it a story? Did I get all the details right? Maybe she showed up in the mirror first. Was that it? What exactly happened after that? The story ended with her image scrawled over the walls. But what came after that? Did the person ever write an update? I need to find the author. I need to know if it was who I think it was, and if so, why didn't he tell me what was going on? Is it somewhere in his journals? If you remember this story, please help me find it. Something terrible is about to happen. Is already happening to me, and I need answers. And I'm afraid the only one who could give them to me is dead. I'm a night janitor for an elementary school. My work hours are from 3 p.m. to about midnight. Sometimes I stay until almost 3 a.m. when there are after-school activities. I have to help set them up and then clean when they are over, leaving me to clock out at almost dawn sometimes. My designated section has 24 rooms that I clean, alone. Lately, it's been getting dark rather early. When the clock strikes 6, the sun begins to descend into the horizon of swaying trees and half-lit homes, eventually disappearing. Around the same time, all of the other staff members hurry out of the building, leaving me to my work. I'm going to leave the name of this school, my real name, and any other's real names, and the location out of this one, because I just want to keep my identity and the image of the school safe. So, for this story, I'll be Tim. Since I work nights, I always get that paranoia that I'm being watched. I always chalked it up to be my mind playing tricks on me since I'm all alone in this building for several hours at a time. But it was right after Halloween when something strange began to occur. It was that time of year where trees lose their leaves and take on a skeletal silhouette. Autumn. I started to notice that more and more of the students looked as if they were shaken up about something. Always looking at the floor when walking, quiet, anxious, signifying a sort of retreat. This didn't sit well with me. The students were dismissed at 3:30, so I'm present while they are still in class. I am a first-time father and cared for these children. I may just be a janitor, but I'm not some weirdo or heartless guy who just wants a paycheck. These kids were young and needed to feel safe, so I talked with them when I was given the chance. They called me Mr. Tim, the vacuum man. I'm in my 20s, so I'm approachable to a younger crowd, and I felt this brought a sense of comfort to them, rather than some creepy night janitor who was unwelcoming. I saw a child who was walking down the hall and was obviously frightened about something, constantly looking over his shoulder with his eyebrows raised. I asked quietly, "Is something bothering you, kiddo?" He let out a short yelp. Whoa, it's okay, it's just me. Is everything alright? I tried to reassure the boy. Oh, hey, Mr. Tim. Yeah, I'm okay, he said nervously. You know, if there's something bothering you, don't be afraid to tell me about it. I could probably help you. I'm Mr. Tim, the vacuum man. He laughed and then said, Well, yeah, I know. Okay, well, whenever I use the bathroom, I see this tall man smiling at me. I immediately got chills. What? Is it someone in the school? Someone you recognize? He replied, No, I can barely see him. He's all black. It's like a shadow. But I know he's there. I know it. This could have been the child's imagination. I mean, Halloween just passed, so maybe he was just scared from that. But all of the other students were behaving rather odd. So maybe this boy was really seeing someone, or something, stalking him in the bathroom. That sounds like it's just your imagination, kiddo. I wouldn't worry about it. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you since Halloween just passed. Try to focus on your schoolwork more and maybe it will go away. I tried to calm him. Yeah, I'll try. He spoke softly. All right, off you go then. This bothered me. Was there some pervert hiding in the bathrooms here? My mind began to race. I couldn't just ignore this information. My first thought was to tell the principal. When I did, her reaction was exactly as I imagined. She called the student to her office and asked the child to explain to her what he had told me. He did, sort of frantically, and this made the principal uneasy. The next day, she hired a security guard to patrol the hallways. After about a week, the kids still remained anxious but never spoke of this figure. No one really pried on the matter anyway. We just expected this to be some sort of scare tactic to make this person flee, if there was anyone there to begin with. It seemed like it worked, so the security guard was dismissed and the staff resumed their cheerful outlook on their jobs instead of being worried about some creep that may have been lurking in the shadows ready to pounce on a helpless child. I'm just glad that this wasn't the case. I remember one particular shift. My calendar read that there was going to be a Cub Scouts meeting in the media center at 6:15 and basketball practice at 6:30. So, that meant I would most likely be here before the break of dawn. At around 6 p.m., I unlocked one of the front doors for the Cub Scouts counselor and the coach for the basketball team. Moments passed and the Cub Scouts counselor walked through the doors. I greeted him, helped him set up, and went back to my normal duties. I didn't have to help the coach since the gym had everything he needed for sports. I just had to lock the doors once they were gone and refinish the floor, from all the shoe marks and any trash on the ground. As far as the Cub Scouts meeting, it was the same concept. Just had to vacuum around the used area and disinfect any surfaces, along with throwing any trash left behind away. During my normal shift duties, I couldn't help but feel as if I was being watched again. I kept telling myself that it could have been a student or a parent watching me from a distance. but I was in a more secluded area of the building, away from the after-school activities. This was different. It felt like someone was nearby. You know how you can hear someone coming from around a corner without actually hearing their footsteps or physically seeing them? It was just like that, only all around me. Once the after-school activities came to an end at around 8, I made sure every person was out of the building and locked the doors. The front doors had windows on them, and it was pitch black outside. Once I finished engaging the last lock, I couldn't help but notice a tall and dark-clothed man behind me in the reflection. I quickly turned around, only to see that no one was there. What the hell? I thought to myself. I sighed and continued with my duties. I started the gym floor and began buffing the floors. This was the job that took most of the time, so I wanted to get this done first. As I finished, I turned the machine off, and in the distance, I could hear muffled screams. It came from the building. Okay, something is not right here, I exclaimed. I got all of the equipment into the receiving room and left the floor to dry, and I could still hear the faint sounds of screaming. It was coming from my section, and I still had rooms to do. I decided to put in some headphones and listen to music so I could ignore this strange occurrence. I decided to put on classical music, as it helped calm my nerves. I started with Moonlight Sonata, a piece from Beethoven, and just let my playlist shuffle. When I clean the rooms, I normally just focus on what's in front of me. But tonight, I couldn't help but look around me as if I were to see the man in a corner somewhere. I tried my best to just ignore it. But when I got to a part of a room located by a window, I felt compelled to look outside. All I could see was total darkness. Pitch black. Not a street light, no dim and distant lights from a home. Just darkness. Then the power went out. I was absolutely terrified. What I saw outside will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was the most sinister, elongated face I have ever seen. His eyes sunken in but wide and focused. Wrinkled skin with a white complexion and the most menacing smile I could ever imagine, complete with what seemed like over 100 teeth that looked like needles. I wasted no time and I ran out of that building without even clocking out or looking back. I ran outside to my vehicle without looking over my shoulder to see if that thing was following me, and when I started my car and drove out of the parking lot, to the left of me in the playground, I could see him watching me. He was waving. The next day, my supervisor was furious, as I just left without clocking out or calling security to lock the doors. I explained what happened, and he fired me. One day, on my own accord, I went to that school and wanted to warn the principal about what happened to me. I met with her, and I told her to hire an exorcist or someone to cleanse the school spiritually, because there is something evil in there. She replied, "Tim, I don't understand. What happened?" I told her everything. How this tall man scared the living shit out of me. How I heard screams. Everything. Her mood changed. She seemed uneasy. She let out a long breath and began to speak. "There's something I want to show you." She then went to a filing cabinet and opened it, sifting through files and finally pulled out a book. It was a yearbook from 1986. "What's that for?" I asked. She then flipped through some pages and finally stopped on a page that had pictures with descriptions under them. She pointed one out and said, "Here, take a look." What I saw was a tall man mopping a floor with a smile I will never forget. It was the man I saw that night. It had to be. "Oh my God," I said while shivering.
He was the janitor here from 1984 to 1986. I was told he would go into the bathrooms and spy on the kids, both boys and girls, smiling at them. My heart sank and I let out a whimpering cough, trying to clear my throat, which was now gasping for air. What happened to him? She closed the book, looked at me, and said, aside from the spying, he got fired for constantly scaring the children even after Halloween was over. He would make them scream in terror. Those were the screams I heard. After he got fired, he would stalk the students. They would go missing. At first, no one thought anything of it, since he was an overnight janitor and always had his clock-out slips read that he stayed here until 3 a.m. rather often. She paused and locked eyes with me. But a detective brought him in for questioning. He was then arrested and admitted that he kidnapped, raped, and killed 15 students. She told me the detective who brought him in for questioning claimed that he was smiling when he confessed, speaking calmly and confidently, waving at the mirror behind the detective. He was given the death penalty by lethal injection. Apparently, the detective claimed that he was also smiling, even as he died.